Hey, Matt, this bit of news sort of hit all of us in January. The United States Surgeon General, Dr. Vivek Murthy, issued an advisory and he was calling for new updated warning levels on alcoholic beverages, cautioning that it increases risk of several types of cancer. Did you hear that?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No, it really caught me. For some reason, I really got into that whole thing. I think that was one of the last things he did in his official role before he left office. But it was big. Yeah. And a lot of my friends were talking about it. Patients have been talking about it. And I found it a great opportunity, since I was already doing Dry January, to dive into the latest kind of literature, find out where they came up with this and why now. And it's really led to, I think, an interesting deep dive sort of back into
Yeah,
alcohol and heart health and health in general.
I agree. I mean, I get asked every day, wine's good for my heart, right?
Yeah, yeah, of course. As
Yeah.
cardiologists here in Northern California, we get that, right? Mine must be healthy. Carolyn, it's just been interesting to see. I mean, I think there's four big organizations that have, and there's more than that, but I'll just focus on the four: World Health Organization, the Surgeon General, American Heart Association, and the National Academy of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine all kind of have different takes on how alcohol can affect heart
Right,
health. And the differences are pretty big. And that's why
right.
so many of our patients are confused about what to do. Is alcohol good? Is it good for my heart? Bad for cancer?
I tell people all the time, how can it be bad for the rest of your body and good for your heart and still
Yeah.
be okay
Yeah, it doesn't
when
make
you
sense,
really
does
get
it?
down to it?
Yeah.
Right. But before we really get into a lot of these recommendations, let's just review some of the data that has gotten us there. And it's such a complicated story that I think it's worth trying to tell this story really in the right way to make it less confusing. And the first part of this story really is these new warning labels that have come out about the cancer risk. And there's all this data out there that shows that alcohol consumption is responsible for about 100,000 cancer cases each year and cancer-related deaths in the United
Yeah.
States each year.
Yeah, I think that those numbers are amazing. And then the other reason for this new advisory from the Surgeon General was that what they say is only 50% of people recognize that alcohol is even related to cancer. So they thought they needed this big campaign to sort of at least start talking about it again, which is wise.
As we know, alcohol is classified as a dependence-producing psychoactive drug. It's a drug,
Yeah.
and it's also classified as a group 1 carcinogen.
Yeah. And I had to look this up too, because I thought, what is that? How does that compare to other group 1 carcinogens? And this stuff's kind of scary. Other group 1 carcinogens are asbestos, tobacco, processed meats, arsenic, and plutonium.
That
Well,
doesn't sound like good company to keep.
you
I'm
don't want
just saying.
plutonium out on the evening. No, that's not good.
So it's classified as carcinogenic. And it's really thought that there are 4 different ways, different mechanisms that can increase this cancer risk. But it's really felt not to be specifically due to the ethanol, but as the ethanol breaks down in our body to an active metabolite called acetaldehyde. Say that 3 times really fast. And this compound acetaldehyde has the ability to bind to DNA and cause mutations, and mutations are what directly lead to
Yeah.
cancer formation.
Yeah. I think there are 4 proposed ways that alcohol can lead to cancer, and that seems to be the biggest one. This active metabolite that messes with your DNA. Not good. Especially if you already have other risk factors or you have a family history of cancer, then throwing something that is potentially cancer producing on top of it is not good, not
Right.
healthy.
And it does increase. So we know that acetaldehyde increases the risk of GI cancers. And honestly, it can have a higher effect on women, especially women who are at risk for breast cancer and ovarian cancers, has a much greater risk of causing those sort of cancers.
I think, Carolyn, I want to try to get a certain message across today when we're talking about alcohol and health. And I think the way I'm trying to think about this big theme is alcohol is a drug, and has a dose dependent relationship to your body. How the bigger the dose, the more effects it's going to have.
I think it really comes back to just a little bit of a mindset shift. We think of alcohol as a beverage, but alcohol isn't a beverage. It's a drug. And so if you start thinking about the ethanol that you're consuming,
Yeah,
how it is a drug, that makes you think a little bit differently in
it
how you're
does.
consuming these beverage drinks.
Yeah, it's true. That's well said.
And
Okay.
so, but humans don't just die of cancer. And the National Academy of Science, Engineering, and Medicine suggests that there's actually a decrease in all-cause mortality for people who are drinking alcohol. So is all this decrease, is this related to cardiovascular benefits?
Well, I don't know where it's coming from. Yeah, what they say is there's an 18% decrease of all-cause mortality, which means dying for any reason, for moderate drinkers compared to non-drinkers. So we just talked about the cancer risk over here. Now there's some data to suggest if drinkers maybe have a lower risk of dying overall. So the question is, where does that come from? Is it all coming from its potential cardiovascular benefits, which is why you and I are even talking about this to begin with, right? So
why are two
what does
cardiologists
it do?
talking about cancer?
Like, what does it do to the heart? Is because you had mentioned wine is supposed to be good for me, right? So that's where I think it's time for us to maybe take a look at where this came from, where the recommendations from the American Heart Association come from. And it kind of stems back to Mediterranean style diets and the French paradox from many moons ago, right?
So there's been a lot of observational studies that have looked at different diets, different nutrition all across the world, trying to decide what are the healthiest diets for humans. And so Mediterranean diet is something we've known about for decades, that farmers and fishermen, they're active, they eat good food, they have wine with meals, and they live very long, healthy lives. And it even was found in the French paradox. So this is a study that came out in the 90s. It was a paper published in the journal The Lancet, which is a British journal. And it really highlights this contradictory observation. So the French, they eat a lot of saturated fat and
meat,
cholesterol.
Yep.
There's a lot of cheese,
Yep.
butter, meat, and there's a much higher proportion of smoking.
Right.
Yet they have a lot lower rates of cardiovascular disease than other populations with these similar dietary habits, like Americans and the British. And so they wondered, is it because of alcohol drinking and wine that's much more prevalent in their diet?
Yep, that's what it's called, the French paradox, right? So higher risk, but more alcohol. Does the alcohol somehow protect people? Yeah, that's been going around for a long time. And that's where this whole thing came into being. Wine must be good for my heart.
Right. And it really turns out that the more we've learned about the cardiac benefits of alcohol, now we think that there's sort of a distortion of these observational trials. There's a lot of confounding factors. So there's a lot of other things that go along with mild and moderate wine intake. Some populations have more exercise, like the French. They're much more active. They generally are thinner. Overall diets tend to be better. They have better socioeconomic status.
Yeah. So it's been very difficult to tease out the alcohol piece into like the moderate drinkers who also tend to have a healthier lifestyle, better socioeconomic conditions than those that drink too much. So that's been difficult. And even from that whole standpoint, there was talk about these antioxidants that you can get from wine. So maybe that's the protective part. And there's a substance in the wine skins called resveratrol that seems to have some positive antioxidant effects. But it turns out that you can, first of all, get those from grapes and grape juice and other things. But it also seems like you would need to drink a ton of wine to get any specific effects from the resveratrol alone. So that isn't really panning out the way they thought it would.
So what we want to be clear about is that these observational studies where they just watched a group of people for a period of time to see what happened, they didn't try anything. They found an association between wine and cardiovascular benefits that potentially lower your risk of dying from heart disease, but they've never established a cause and effect link that shows that drinking wine leads to further cardiovascular benefits.
Yeah.
And that's what you're really looking for.
That's going to be, I think, next to impossible to improve. There's too many variables, right?
Right.
And so while we're still trying to figure out what, if any, positive cardiovascular benefits come from alcohol, we know for sure that there are some effects on the cardiovascular system, right? It does have some effect on the inner lining of the arteries called the endothelium. It can raise your blood pressure. It can raise your heart rate. This certainly is clearly established with the atrial fibrillation. So some people who drink alcohol, almost any amount, their rates of atrial fibrillation go up, which increases your stroke risk, which is not good. And for people who are big drinkers, heavy alcohol use is clearly associated with a very toxic effect on the heart called a cardiomyopathy, which is a weakening of the heart muscle, which is often life-threatening. So you always are weighing all these things into balance. What are your risks? Have you had abnormal heart rhythms before? What's your blood pressure before you make those decisions about any alcohol use?
Oh, we've already spent a lot of time talking about alcohol and its relationship to multiple cancers. We've talked about the relationship that alcohol has with the cardiovascular system.
Yeah.
But not just that, alcohol affects over 200 different medical conditions in the human body, starting with addiction, accidents related to overuse from alcohol, dementia, cirrhosis, so many different organ systems. All
Affects
the
the whole
organ
body.
systems can be affected.
Well, I think, Carolyn, that's why the World Health Organization is very clear, I think, about their stance. They've thrown it down, which I really like. So what they say, I'm going to read it because they say the World Health Organization about alcohol says there is no safe amount of alcohol consumption and that the risk to the drinker's health starts from the very first drop of any alcoholic beverage. That's really stuck out to me. I keep thinking about that, is how powerful that is compared to some of the other statements. You got one people saying it decreases overall mortality. You've got another group saying if you're going to drink moderately. And another group is saying, just be aware that there's some cancer risk there. These guys are laying it on the line. Don't touch it, which is I respect.
Matt, you mentioned the American Heart Association. It's closest to our hearts.
Yes.
Heart, no pun intended. But the American Heart Association doesn't say do not drink. It also doesn't say it's okay to drink. It says for those who choose to drink alcohol, here's the amount that you should be able to drink. And so for men, it's no more than 2 drinks per day, no more than 15 drinks over the course of a week. And for women, it's only 1 drink per day, no more than 8 drinks per week. Over 7-day period.
And then that's not only just because women are different shapes or different sizes or smaller than most men, but it's also the way women can't handle the alcohol effects as much based on some...
Our cardiovascular systems are different than men's.
It's different, right?
It's just different, right?
So I think, Carolyn, one of the biggest things that stood out to me and kind of re-looking at all this is the dose. We keep talking about the dose, but it does come down to a dose. And I hate to use that term when people are just thinking about alcohol and having a beer or whatever, but things have changed. These recommendations haven't really changed, but dosing has changed, right? The supersizing of America's food products has also now really affected alcohol drinks. So let's define what the dosing is so that you can understand where you sit in relation to these recommendations and to your health. First of all, for a glass of wine, the dose is 5 ounces, considering that's about a 12% alcohol by volume percent wine. For beer, that is 12 ounces of 5% alcohol by volume. And for alcohol, it's 1.5 ounces of 80 proof liquor, which is 40% alcohol by volume. So I think we are missing the boat a little bit in what people think they're getting. They're trying to follow the guidelines. They're like, hey, I want to just do what's right. But there has been this change in how much alcohol is in your drink. And as a beer drinker, I can tell you a couple of changes that have happened. Number one is the alcohol by volume is changing. An IPA and a hazy IPA and a double IPA and a triple IPA are way more than this 5% dose. Right. And the size of each beer has gotten bigger over time as well, right? A traditional 12-ounce can is kind of hard to find now. It's usually 16 ounces is the way people are buying it. So not only are you getting more per drink, but the alcohol volume is also higher. So yeah, and people still count it the old way, even though times have changed.
Right. Wine is the same way. So if you're at home and you're sharing a bottle of wine and you think, I'm okay, I'm only having 2 glasses of wine, that's actually a 6-ounce pour with a higher amount of alcohol than what is recommended. So you're probably closer to 3 or 4 glasses of wine. You just have to be aware of it. And don't forget,
for a woman, you're only supposed to have 1, which means if you're finishing the bottle, the man's had 3, which is way too much for everybody.
It's too much for everybody. Right.
So and it's just a comment, and these are good-hearted. These are people who are knowledgeable about drinking and are trying to do the right things. But I think everything's just shifting gradually, and you don't think about it. And next thing you know, you're above and beyond what moderate drinking truly is. And what's interesting is you almost never hear anybody talking about light drinking or what is light drinking. We talk about moderate and heavy. We know that binge drinking is bad. We know that heavy drinking is bad. So I think you said this when we were talking about the other day. I think we should all be aiming for light. And for those of us that run over a little bit, hit the moderate zone rather than trying to hit moderate, but actually hitting the heavy zone.
I find that every day when I'm talking to people that their perception of how much they're drinking is that they are trying to be moderate drinkers, but they really tend to fall more into the heavy drinking category. And just to become aware of that is really important for their overall health.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that's why we wanted to talk about alcohol in general, is because people want to do the right thing. I think we just have to reevaluate. The Surgeon's General New Advisory has helped bring to mind to me, just it needs to be kind of studied and looked at in more detail. And the other way I try to look at this is really what people need to think about is how alcohol affects you and is going to play a role in your life is different for everybody. So,
Matt, we're making an assumption here that if you're a non-drinker, you're probably not listening to this podcast.
That's
right.
I
You're
think
not
that's
listening.
safe to say. Probably not this far into it.
And you
right?
probably are starting to become a little bit aware of what kind of quantities you are drinking and want to figure out some ways to cut back and become more mindful of your drinking for whatever reason. It doesn't matter what your reason is. If you feel like you need to cut back, go for it. You should cut back. No question about it.
Sober curious is a new term that I've heard. Is that correct?
It is. Sober curious is actually based on a book that came out prior to the pandemic.
Okay.
And it's really meant for people who are interested in a different mindset relationship with alcohol and how that can affect their everyday lives for, again, like I said, whatever the reason is that they want to cut back. We've talked about a lot of health reasons to cut back. There may be social reasons to cut back, sleeping reasons to cut back, all of those things.
I think the why and the how is pretty complicated. There's so many different ways you can do that. I think from my standpoint, it's really just about perspective. So all the alcohol guidelines don't fit everybody, right? So for many people, you should never have any alcohol. For a lot of people that have higher risk of cancer, that have higher risk of cardiovascular disease, that have atrial fibrillation, that want to lose weight, alcohol doesn't fit into that in any scenario. But for the active, healthy person who is exercising most days, has an occasional glass of wine, there's a different story there. So I think trying to put one class of recommendations for a drug like alcohol is impossible. So you've got to be smart, read the data, read the literature, know what people are saying and talking about, and then try to put it together for yourself. I think is the best way to go about it. But we do know less is better and none is probably best. So always keep that in mind as well.
Thanks, everybody, for listening today.
Thanks, everybody.